So, greetings, Baba Khalil. Many thanks for you agreeing to appear on our podcast. I want to welcome you to the Black Foundation podcast, where we try to highlight people who are engaged in work specifically dealing with not only the broader focus of the Black Foundation, such as Black language, arts, and culture, and for me, there's been a desire to focus specifically on mind, body, and spirit, and
Mhm.
those three domains of activity. And I know that you are a person, both in terms of your own practice, but also in terms of your family, that these are
Mhm.
the elements which are fundamental. So maybe we could start with you telling us a little bit about yourself, as well as your father, Shahan Mfundishi Maasi, who is a very noted and legendary figure in the martial arts community, but also a spiritualist. But again, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your father, uh,
Mhm.
especially your father's background in the movement, as well as
Mhm.
your background and as his background in the movement and the martial arts, as well as your background in the martial arts and also the film industry or the entertainment industry.
Okay. All right. Cool, cool. So, um, my name is Khalil Maasi. I'm known as Mrithi Mfundishi. Khalil Maasi, son of Shah Mfundishi Maasi and Marion Saintville. I always make sure that particularly these days, I'm trying to remind myself to make sure I mention my mother
I
because this
say,
is something that a lot of people don't hear
I say.
sometimes. I'm also a Babalao in the Yoruba tradition, and I'm known as Awo Shangalari Awo Tude Karade Fokoyode. As I said, I'm the son of Shah Fidishi Masi. I've been training in the martial arts uh, most of my life, as far as I can remember, walking, talking it, and yeah, since about 5 years old, I started in the martial arts of Bondo. Formally, even though I was around it already in a playpen and all that type of stuff. So under my father, I started in the martial art of Bondo, but was within a circle or community of martial artists due to my father. And so it was kind of a more like, even though Bondo was the root system that I was studying at the time, it was an integrated learning of different martial artists who were coming along that my father was friends and comrades with and picking up skill sets here and there, whether it be more internal or external. Um, of course, as you know from some of the activity that you see me involved with online and in person, that I'm involved in the African traditions in terms of martial science. Through my father, through his organization, Pan African Martial Arts Federation, and a system of Kupigani and Gumi, which he co-founded both with Nganga and Fidisha Tolona. And of course, within Kupigani and Gumi, it's basically a martial system that reclaims the martial tradition of the African diaspora here in America for people of African descent as well as the Pan African Martial Arts Federation is a larger organization that brings together martial artists of African descent, regardless of system or style. With our focus, though, being on our cultural heritage. Um, in terms of my father, to expound on him again more so, uh, uh, he Shah Mfadishi Masi was born to uh, he was born a descendant of people of Jamaica of Maroon heritage. He was born here in America though, but he grew up in a home with his mother and his grandparents. It was reminded of that heritage every day through his grandfather, who came from an area called Above Rock in Jamaica, which is known for it being Maroon country, but also that it was a place where the people who were fleeing persecution from Haiti would come there to flee persecution and settle there and live amongst the marooned people who had their own land, which they won in a treaty and signed a treaty with the British government. So that is the culture that he would hear about growing up from his grandfather. His grandmother was what was known as she was a healer, and she was born with a veil over her face. And those people are usually notified as seers and healers in Jamaican culture and in African diaspora culture. She was a seer and a healer. So this was what he grew up under. And but he was born here in America, came of age in East Orange in Newark, New Jersey. Uh, uh, Went through all of the things that went happened to young men during that time, Jim Crow, you know, and growing up in the streets of Newark, New Jersey, you know, the racism, Jim Crow, and things of that nature. Eventually ended up going into the Marine Corps around 17 years old. Uh, Dealt with that experience over in Laos, Southeast Asia. And that's where he began his formal study of martial arts. Uh, uh, the Marine Corps training as a martial art, and also he studied Kempo karate under a man named Sergeant James Holt. Upon returning, he continued his martial art career, studying under Shitarua, the Grandmaster James Cheatham in Newark, New Jersey, a black man who was one of the I still haven't found out completely if he was one of the first, if not the first, black martial artist to open a school in Newark, New Jersey. In that school was other notables such as boxing commissioner Larry Hazard, uh, who eventually become boxing, New Jersey boxing or sport or fight combat commissioner Larry Hazard, Kareem Abdallah, who fought on the uh, was it the Rumble in the Jungle or Thrill in the Manila? I think it was the Thriller in Manila undercard. It was one of the two. Uh, and several others. Prentice Newton, who was considered the top gun in the class, actually, above even my father, and several other great martial artists of that golden era martial arts came out of there. Upon the death of Grandmaster James Cheatham, he moved through various systems and styles, studied with various teachers like Grandmaster Alan Lee in New York City, notable Kung Fu Grandmaster, legendary Kung Fu Grandmaster, and cross-trained with the various notables in our community, uh, like Dr. Moses Powell and many, many others, and eventually settled into studying under Grandmaster uh, Umang Ji of the Bando system, where my father became eventually the first non-Asian to reach the third level, what's known as the third level of achievement in Bando. This is the first of non-Asian descent anywhere in the world. Um, he also became involved in around that time in the issues that were going on in our community, what we call social justice now. Through Grandmaster James Cheatham, he ended up joining the Nation of Islam and taught briefly there the first martial art class at Maasi 25 in Newark, New Jersey. Uh, After the assassination of Malcolm X and other events, he ended up leaving the Nation of Islam and went further into the Black Power movement, the cultural nationalist movement, and worked with our great ancestor, Mama Mary Baraka, Nana Balozi, Harvey Muhammad, and as well as he worked with us organization with Dr. Malana Karanga out in California, and who ended up giving him the title of the name Mfundishi, which was his name, but which became also a title for our organization. Um, that some would acquaint with a level of high mastery. Um, you also asked about his spiritual, uh, whatever spiritual training he had and such forth. He, well, again, he was born to what were some would call in a family. He had a grandmother who someone would what some would say would be Obeah, even though they were syncretists as well, practiced Christianity. So that was his early understanding of African tradition, was through his grandmother, through the root work and such forth that she did, the healing and things of that nature. Um, uh, Later on, he would again he joined the Nation of Islam at one point, and even went to the Sunnah, but ended up because of his martial training being attracted to Buddhism, which he was introduced to under several teachers, but more root wise under Dr. Mongshi, and again became a practitioner of Buddhism uh, through the study of Bando and Minzen. Uh, Later on, he would also become initiated into Tibetan Buddhism and ended up taking part in the Black Crown ceremony, which is one of its highest ceremonies in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. But he also was initiated into Voodoo as well, which this is one of the first places that I've actually spoke about that publicly, but I thought it was it's important to bring that up, uh, that people would know that as far as his connection into traditional African or African diaspora religion and spirituality. So I'm gonna stop right there. There's a much more to talk about in terms of his
Wow.
working with the
Yeah.
Newark Rebellion and
Yes, sir.
all that type of stuff here.
Was he, in terms of the last piece you mentioned, I didn't know that either, and it provoked a question. Was this with Baba Metahochi?
I'm not sure, to be honest. There are a lot of areas, to be dead honest, that I'm still researching
Hmm.
and on him because he was a mystery to a lot of people, even to me.
Yes, sir.
So that's a good question. I didn't even think of going in that area. So I'm going to do some research and see if that's where he became initiated. There's a lot of things he didn't talk about.
Yes,
He was
sir.
a very, you know, very reclusive person, even amongst his family members. you know.
It's
So
interesting. It's interesting too, Baba. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. No, go ahead.
It's interesting too because he reminds me of some of my elders, now ancestors here in Chicago, who
Hmm.
talked to they lived many lives. Like they didn't,
Hmm. Yeah.
they may have been in 80 years, but they they're like, what they did in 80 years was some people doing like three lifetimes,
Yeah. No, literally, I talk about that with some of my friends and comrades about just the level of work, the level of study uh, that they've done, that my father did, far surpasses what I'm going to be able to do in my lifetime. The amount of books. I have a ton of books and materials now that I myself and some of the other students are going through that I know I won't be able to read, but the resources are there, which we're figuring out how to preserve and make available for future generations.
Wow. So really appreciate that. One of the things I noted over the years, and this was something that I think when I first started corresponding with Shahan Fundishi Maasi, I think I was aware that he was a mindfulness teacher,
Hmm.
and eventually I became aware that you were also a mindfulness teacher. And I know that one of the things that he taught, and talked about, was the idea that the cultivation of the mind via meditation was a prerequisite for the kind of critical consciousness that we need to transform our communities. A lot of people, the emphasis is on action, that we need to go out and act, we need to do this, we need to do that. But I noticed he was very intentional in terms of the methodology that he had conceived of, that we cultivate the mind, and this is the foundation for action. And my question for you, and you know, and I'm sure this is borne out in your work as well. Why is the mind considered so vital for to both personal development as well as African liberation?
Um, I'm going to speak as best as I can. Again, as to what he, where his mind was at in that, as and for myself, I think somewhere along the path of his journey, he discovered, through martial arts, the connection between, the body and the mind, and how important it is for us to be able to master ourselves. Martial arts, as you know, is an excellent vehicle for learning how to control ourselves. And it's a symbiotic practice, the physical and the mental. And, and most of the, training in my mind is more mental, even though we're using our bodies heavily, most of the training is mental. You know, just the idea of being able to, or the thought and the challenges, the ideas of being able to accomplish something that is seemingly arduous and almost impossible. The things that we have to learn how to do with our body and to learn how to withstand certain forces. So through that training and through his own personal trauma, which the training helped him deal with, he began to realize the the power of the mind and how critical it is in us as a people disciplining ourselves to deal with the forces that are coming at us, that were coming at us, and that are coming at us. And he saw what it did for him, and then what it did for others as he began to train others. And so he saw that as a critical tool and piece. For myself, the same thing. Uh, of course, doing these things because it was part of who I am. It wasn't a question of whether I was going to, practice standing in Ulawingo, what we call holding the ball for an hour. No, you're going to do that. So these were tasks, that I was these are things that I was tasked to do growing up, sometime as training, sometime as discipline. But there became a point where I began to realize what it was doing for myself, and particularly growing up in the area that I come from. I'm from East Orange, New Jersey, born and raised, the actual borderline of Newark and East Orange, the teen streets. And people who know about that know that there's a history that goes with that area. We have these infamous areas in all of our hoods around America, in the world. And where I'm come, the teen streets, or what they call DTH, short for down the hill, is where all of the action was at. It was ground zero. Um, if ever heard, it's the area where the group Naughty by Nature comes from. And it's considered one of the again more infamous neighborhoods where all of the action was at. And later on in its history, I would say not later on, but in the 90s and early 2000s is when the West Coast gangs migrated to the East Coast, and that was, if you understand the history, that was the first place they landed. So it even intensified everything even more. So growing up in that environment, I didn't grow up in the time period. I was already grown in my early 20s when the street organizations from the West Coast came in. But the area was already, had that vibe, which gave it a foundation to come in and spread and do what it did to the area, and to the people, and to the mindset and such forth. And just having the training that I had, it gave me the discipline to deal with that situation as it came in and infiltrated the community in terms of one resisting the urge to be involved in it, and then two, dealing with some of the challenges of now having to move around through that because it spread like wildfire quick. So you had to know how to deal with that, on many politically, culturally, mindfully, and everything else. You see the young homies getting into it. Some of my nephews my oldest nephew uh, ended up getting involved. My older sister's son, who's really more like a little brother to me, a much younger little brother, but hit seeing him and his friends getting involved, and dealing with them and trying to steer them away and some of the things that transpired out of that, which is a whole nother story. But yeah, for me, mindfulness is just a matter of survival, growing up in urban communities, anywhere we're at. But for me, it was a matter of survival, just being able to keep my head in situations, and dealing with the things we deal with, the police, you know, the stick up kid, you know, my own negative thoughts or thoughts that are negative that may try to come into me and how to respond and deal with that, my own young brushes with the law, you know. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. But so much in there I can relate to personally because growing up on the
Hmm.
south side of Chicago, similar,
Hmm.
I lived in some rough places. I lived in
Yeah.
neighborhoods where I went to sleep to it was it was a symphony of gunfire every night,
Yeah.
and I got to go to school every day. You know what I'm saying? I got to walk
Yeah.
from the bus stop around here. I got to go to the corner store around here. You have to deal with all that danger. And it was
Hmm.
when I was 16, I started meditating. And
Hmm.
for me, the meditation also, it was a way to your point, it was a tool of self-mastery. You know,
Hmm.
that the chaos is out there, but the chaos can't be in here. It's
Hmm.
me. So the world can abound with chaos, but I recognize in order to navigate that chaos, I had to be, centered,
Hmm.
grounded. And so I really can appreciate, and relate to so much of that because very
Yeah.
similar dynamic in terms of the gangs, the police, all kind of stuff. Hmm.
My father would used to say, in one of his numerous lectures and discourses, uh, that it's easy, not easy. It's one thing to be the monk or the mindful master when you're sitting in the temple, sitting alone in quiet spaces. It's another thing to maintain that when you're moving throughout the world, when you're moving throughout the marketplace, and maintaining that same discipline and composure and focus. Yeah.
I say, yeah, that's powerful. So you
Mhm.
mentioned the martial arts, and that kind of takes, let's get into that because one of the things that I always appreciated about your presentation of the arts, as well as
Mhm.
Baba's presentation of the art, Mfundishi Maasi's presentation of it, was that the martial arts was not just about kicking and punching. And I remember it was an interview he did with Daryl Sargent, him and
Mhm.
Mfundishi
Mhm.
Ganga Toluna years
Yeah.
ago.
Mhm.
Where he talked about that. He said it's not just about kicking and punching. And
Mhm.
and I know both of you all have maintained that these traditions are tools for the cultivation of mind, body, and spirit.
Mhm.
And my question
Mhm.
is, why are martial arts such valuable tools for our personal development as well as our collective development?
Um, for our personal development, again, it's for all of those things that we get at them that have been beneficial mentally, physically, spiritually. The level of discipline, the level of focus, the level of respect that we gain for ourselves, the empowerment. It's just a different vibe as a martial artist, as you know, when you're moving throughout the world, and you have gained a certain level of mastery. You feel different. You feel you can move, go anywhere. You feel you can look any man in the eye. You feel you can deal with any situation. You might fail in that situation. You might not win that fight. You might not pass that test, but there's a certain vibe that you have that I could do this, you know. So it's very important just in terms of on the individual level of self-mastery, to be able to move throughout this world as a conscious human being. And then collectively, the unifying principles that are in martial arts, and practices. The training builds a certain level of brotherhood and sisterhood and camaraderie. And then when we're talking about respect, that respect that we extend not just from that we expect for ourselves, but that we extend to others. Again, the discipline to come together in a group of people and all discipline ourselves and move in one accord. The martial art teaches so many different things. The same thing with the focus. These things can be individual or they can be a unified energy. And when it's unified, it's much more powerful. Yeah, and we know that in our history, how if we study martial arts, we study rites of passage, manhood training, you know, warrior training. We understand how vital that was in ancient communities. In terms of just basically having a community. The warrior arts or the first line of not of protection, not just physically but mentally and spiritually. Also what came out of the warrior ranks was inventions. You know, now we're going into the area, cultivation and cultivating civilization. What we're talking now, we're talking about Ogun. You know, not just cutting and killing and fighting off opposing, tribes and marauders, but also building a civilization. So much comes out of martial arts. The martial arts was one of, if not the first science of our people. Because you had to protect yourself from the very beginning. And from those practices of beginning to protect ourselves, to begin technology around that, to build codes, and and civilization and structure, begin the building of our communities. And so I think our whole destiny, not think, our whole destiny is connected to our warriorhood. And even if you go back to one of the most ancient stories uh, on the planet, if not the oldest story on the planet, the divine drama. Uh, well, it is a story of warriorhood. You know, yeah, it shows us right there how we are connected to this, or how we're supposed to be connected to our warrior culture, our martial culture. Uh, but we are disconnected from it as a community. We're highly disconnected from it.
Baba, that's very powerful. It
Mhm.
when you were speaking, it brought to mind how it would just even just in African our traditions, the African and even the African diasporan traditions, warriorhood
Mhm.
is threaded through all those traditions.
Mhm.
Certainly in the
Mhm.
Orisha tradition, you have Ogun, but in like the
Mhm.
Akan tradition, you have Nana Dade Kofi. You
Mhm.
have Gu in Vodun,
Mhm.
Fon. I think Eve and Fon Vodun. I think he's Gu in both those systems. You have even in Hoodoo, you have Hajan the
Mhm.
Conqueror.
Mhm.
And so it's
Mhm.
fascinating how for our ancestors, warriorhood was and spiritual development were linked. And of course you
Mhm.
see that also in many of the traditions in other parts of the world,
Mhm.
particularly in terms of Asia. So I really
Mhm.
appreciate that you said that you presented the arts in that way.
Yeah, these are things that are encoded into our DNA. Martial arts is not something that we go out and pick up and put on. It's something that a teacher pulls out to us, or a mother lion pulls out of the cub. you know, uh, Hits a trigger or a switch inside of you through play, through practice, through discipline practices, and bring these things outside of you. So this is part of our heritage, as even some studies are showing right now. Genetic memory wise and such forth. And then if you read, well, there's a article that I had put up online a long time ago and had sent out to certain people about an event that happened at it was a Smithsonian event in New York City where I first met Mr. Grande, Mr. Cobramansa, Dr. Fouquier, Robert Farrar Thompson, met them all in one sweep at this event. This happened in the early 90s. And there was a document that was put out with this event that talked about our natural, our what they call, what was coined in it is the African philosophy of movement in sports and combat. And it spoke about how these are intrinsic, this is an intrinsic thing that we are born with, that comes from our connection to the Most High, our connection, to the Creator, to the divinities, to our ancestors, and such forth. It's not a coincidence that all of these traditions have a warrior aspect to it. Most religions were warrior religions. If you read any of them and look at the conflict in them and the battles that they had to deal with inside of themselves and outside as well. So this is who we are. This is the nature of human beings. We are born with this conflict and struggle inside of us that we deal with uh, internally and externally. And so our the evolution, if I could call it that, of the world is based on that energy, balancing that energy of warriorhood and civilization, conflict and peace, and so forth. Yeah.
That's very powerful, Baba. That was my wife and I were in Bahia a few months back, and there at one of the museums there was an exhibit, Caminho do Ferro, the Way of Iron, and
Mm,
so right there, the opening is about Ogun,
mhm,
and there's this
mhm,
one part, it's a very moving section where you go in, where it's an Oriki to Ogun,
mhm,
uh, and it's very interesting how you frame that because certainly in the Orisha tradition. And I can see this in other traditions as well, but like either conceptualization of Ogun, not just as an elemental force, but also as a sort of motive force in terms of the progression
mhm,
of society in terms of
mhm,
technology. That's really fascinating. And
mhm,
how
mhm.
he's also inextricably linked to the martial. I mean, there's so many
Yeah,
layers of symbolism there.
exactly. And again, when most people are looking at Ogun, they are thinking the machete, the iron, the warrior, the fighting. But Ogun is also about technology, civilization, moving civilization forward. So we have to look into that side of what Ogun is, as well as we have to look into that side of martial arts as well. Also, we have to look at it as just being about the back to the punch and the kick. We have to look. What my father found was that, you know, here in Ganga Talonda, they saw that martial arts was a vehicle for the empowerment of our community to raise us up out of the physical and moral and decay, mental decay that we were in. And again, because they found that it helped for them to deal with their own issues and trauma to the extent that it could. They were still human beings. They weren't infallible, but it helped put them on a certain path to move forward and put other young men and young women on the path to move forward and to do some significant things in our community historically. Some very pretty significant things. I mentioned some of those things, with my father, some of the things he did, and particularly I think his most shining and crowning moment was the work he did uh, uh, during the Black Power movement and the Black Arts movement. That he did some pretty significant things that was connected to the overall Pan African movement in the diaspora, and things that definitely were critical here in East Orange, Newark, and Essex County, New Jersey. You in terms of just getting a sense of freedom for us here. With a lot of that stuff is being rolled back right now. That's a whole nother conversation. Yeah.
Yes, sir, indeed. Well, let's delve into the spiritual because we were just talking about the Orisha, and let's start
Mhm.
actually with yourself and your background, and then we can talk about your
Mhm.
Baba's. I know you're a priest of Ifa, and
Mhm.
it's interesting because like I didn't know the piece about your grandmother. No, that was your
Mhm.
Baba's grandmother. Was that your grandmother?
Yeah,
That was
that's his grandmother,
his grandmother.
my great grandmother. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was funny though when you were describing it, I knew what you were about to say. Like I knew as soon as you started talking about it, I was like, I knew where you were going. And so it's clear
Hmm.
that these traditions that you have a genealogical connection to the ways of our ancestors,
Hmm.
right?
hmm
And so my question is, how did you come to the Orisha tradition? And also, how has this tradition informed your approach to fostering healing and transformation in our community?
I have to say that I came to the Orisha tradition because I was born to be that. My name is Awo Shangalari Awo Tunde Karade Fakoyode. And Awo Tunde means the Awo has returned. So just like in the various traditions, say Buddhism, for example, how you have people who reincarnate, we Tunde, we come again. And so that's I have returned. Uh, and I hope that, and I'm not trying to sound vainglorious or anything like that. I speak this in all humility. We are the returning ancestors. You know, we all are returning. Those of us here now, we're here. Estimated time wise by what Ifa says it takes for a person to reincarnate. That 400 or 500 years has brought us back to this point right here. So that's what brought me there. Now, in the sense where more people can understand it more so, um, it's part of my heritage. you know, uh, was not thinking that way as a youth. You're just born into a certain situation, and then at some point, things start to come together, and you realize what it is that you're doing and why you're here. Again, my father, I have to trace it. Uh, again, my father's family's origin. We know the Maroons or the Akan. And I think it's not a coincidence that my father be that my father be born of that maroon heritage and then somehow make his way here or be born here and I should say and be somehow find himself in the middle of the Black Power movement in America and also be a martial artist you know of a very high level and so that set the stage for me to be able to continue to work in the best as I can humbly, uh, because the bulk of the work was done by him. I'm just here to continue to bridge this thing to the next generation so that we don't forget. So no, it's heritage. It's who I am. It was who I was born to be. Even my Odu has spoken of that. My name, which was divine, Shango, Awo Shangolalo Otunde Karade Fokoye Day, which reflects that. And these things are not coincidence for those who know, you know.
Bob, I really appreciate that. You would know this because I don't think we had a conversation about this. My wife would.
Mhm, mhm,
When I talk about myself, I tell her that as far as I'm concerned, I'm just here as a bridge, between the past and the future. So it's interesting here. You say, I thought,
mhm,
he's speaking the very way I've conceived of my own role, right? Because
mhm,
that generation that your Baba was a part of, there was so many people, very powerful people in that generation,
mhm, mhm, mhm,
and we don't live in the times in which they lived and did all the things that they did. And so I see myself as just facilitating the transmission of ideas so that they're available in the future when the time is
mhm.
right. So it was really very
Yeah.
gratifying to hear you say that.
No, we got to keep it real, man. I'm a
Yes.
placeholder. I may be an important placeholder in terms of bridging that, but in all due respect to the work they did, I don't. They did dangerous work under dangerous times, and it's easy to say, I would do this. I don't know what I would do. I've been in some sticky situations and I know what I've done, you know? So, yeah, but still, uh, the, the things that they were facing during a time where if you looked at someone of a certain race wrong, that could mean your life. And that they had the will and the boldness to stand up and do it with far less resources, far less wealth, you know. And many of them were self-taught in many of these. They were teachers, but then they had to learn some things on the fly, you know. So we have to recognize the work that they did and continue to to stand on their shoulders and pass it on. Pass it on. There's a lot more work to be done, but they did it. Even with the stuff that's being rolled back right now, we still have a certain level of comfort that they did not have. you know. So we have to be mindful of that and be respectful to that and be honest in how we assess ourselves. Because he was a man born. They were him. We speak about him specifically. He's a man who was born in a certain set of time that called for certain actions and skill sets that most people wouldn't step up to do. And he chose to do that, and I'm grateful, and I'm grateful that he survived it because I wouldn't be here. My brothers and sisters would not have made it here. So the Creator had a plan. The ancestors had a plan for him and for them.
That's interesting. And so I want to, ask you about your connection to the Orisha tradition. And similarly, I know Ashaha
I'm sorry,
Mfundishi.
did I go too far out?
No,
Did I
no,
answer?
no, no. You're good. I went out of I no, I wanted to raise that question about you because we were talking about the Orisha tradition, so I thought it'd be good continuity.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to just go back a bit and talk about his own background, his connection to
Mm-hmm.
Dharma, because I know he found great wisdom in the teachings of the Buddha. And I
Mm-hmm.
know I was listening to an interview he did with Dashan Farad, and he was talking about how, he would
Mm-hmm.
teach mindfulness to the Simba
Mm-hmm.
in I guess it's
Mm-hmm.
CFUN, a
Mm-hmm.
coalition for unified Newark for our
Yes.
listeners. And I know in my exchanges with him, he emphasized both the profundity of these teachings in addition to their resonance with African
Mm-hmm.
traditions. That was one of the things I always admired about his
Mm-hmm.
thinking. He didn't see these things at a superficial level, but
Mm-hmm.
understood the continuity of these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question is, what role did the Dharma, what role did the teachings of the Buddha play in his life and his work as a teacher and a leader?
Well, that's multifaceted because again, I think the martial arts in his from his own mouth saved his life, and it then, of course, being that connected him to, Buddhism and the mindfulness, helped him deal with his traumatized mind. Again, growing up, we have to remember these folks grew up during Jim Crow. And I don't think we really think about that. And how not too far long ago, he spoke to me of how when he went to Marine Corps, when he was going that bus going to Paris Island, and he's looking out in the field and so the sharecroppers he's there were slaves out there still working the plantations. This is the time frame he grew up in again, and then being around the same age as Emmett Till and the trauma of that. And then he spoke about how, and during his time, when they used to have the sirens going off, the bomb sirens, everybody had to jump under the table and duck their head. You had all these multifaceted things going on. Um, he also uh, spent some time in out here in Jamesburg detention facility as a youth. A lot of people don't know that. This is one of the first times I'm revealing that also publicly. So as a young man, he did the juvie thing and spent some time there. And I only really found out a few years ago how much he mentioned that he spent time there. I only found out how much time he actually spent there. And he didn't talk about this stuff publicly because he did his era. It wasn't about saying, "Yeah, I did so and so time locked up or at the juvie." These are things you didn't want people to know. But I've learned from that more about him and how that may have affected his mind. It also affected his martial practice at a young age, informally, because there were some things that he, spoke to me about and showed me from that era in terms of the urban uh, combat, in terms of what we, call, the jailhouse and things of that nature. 52. So he had an experience with that over here in Newark and New Jersey. That's a whole nother story. Um, but yeah, and anyway, so getting to, Buddhism and mindfulness and the Dharma, uh, it was a healing agent, in his life, and he didn't see any conflict with it and with African uh, culture and tradition and philosophy because it aligns in so many places when you're talking about character building and right behavior and putting energy out into the world and receiving back. We can talk about Maya, we can talk about Iwa Pele, we can talk about the Bakongo tradition. These things all align, so and also we can talk about the connection of Buddhism itself and Tibetan Buddhism and how it there are some things that are debatable in circles of education and so forth, but from what we have seen and what the research is still constantly ongoing, is that these things come directly out of African tradition. You know, there are actual connections historically. Yeah, there's no conflict in his mind, and just even in terms of I know one of the questions in the text you use the word revolutionary, and I even did some homework to do some further deep dive myself, and I went to AI to be honest. I wanted to see what AI thought about that, and they said, well, that there are differences, but there are things that align in terms of and even with revolutionary, being in practicing the Dharma is revolutionary in terms of changing oneself, changing the energy around you, how we treating with other people. It's revolutionary and evolutionary, you know. So there's always going to be culturally areas where our different practices and principles don't align. I think they are fewer than those things that align. You know, from there becomes just a personal choice of what you decide to do based on your preference of how more culturally. Or. But he didn't see any type of separation between him being a traditional African, a traditionalist, which he was, as well as being a practitioner of Buddhism and mindfulness. It's he and just like with the I spoke about, there are a lot of things you didn't put out back in the day. He was never ashamed of practicing voodoo. It was in his area. You didn't put that his era. You didn't put that out there. So it was never something he just ran around telling people, "Yeah, I practice voodoo." you know, you didn't put that out there because just most people didn't even understand. There was social pushback as well too, but it was just something those who knew. And you know we do this among us. So he didn't see any kind in his private space. He would have his Buddhism right there, his his Buddhism right there, and whatever else he had going on. He was also a practitioner of the I Ching, you know. So he maintained several different traditions.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I really appreciate the point that you raised at the beginning because I was
Mhm.
in my one of my first exchanges with him. He laid out, the Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path, and
Mhm.
you cannot look at the Eightfold Path and not see again the
Mhm.
obvious parallels with again
Mhm.
Iwapele, Ma'a.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's a clear parallel here, but also the idea of service. And I don't know a lot about Tibetan Buddhism, but I know in the Mahayana tradition, and I think the Tibetan Buddhism I think it derived from the Mahayana tradition.
Mhm.
There's the idea and I don't know the Sanskrit word, but the idea of Buddha nature, and
Mhm.
the obligation that it calls forth in terms of how you one's charge in the world to cultivate enlightenment
Mhm.
in one's
Mhm.
community. And
Mhm.
the way that he approached it wasn't, and I was always struck by how he approached this and how it was embedded. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It seemed like it was very much embedded in what he did. That is the idea of attempting to to develop people
Mhm.
to their fullest capacity, their full potential, whether it was explicitly through articulating the Dharma or not, it was the process, the tools of cultivation, of self-cultivation transmitted in a variety of very powerful and compelling ways.
Whether it was the Dharma, the Pakango principles, he felt it was his charge and his duty to express and to teach those things. And this wasn't something he came up with. This was what he learned from his teachers, being a member of the Nation of Islam and get receiving the teachings from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Uh, through his martial art teachers, through studying with Dr. Malana Karenga, through studying with Imam Mary Baraka. This was a constant message coming. And so he began to express that in his way through the things that he studied in his teachings. We know, even, it's interesting that, that we're on this subject because I was looking at something before we got on. And you can even see this in his later years as he was doing his work and research and understanding the Bukongo tradition and expressing his practice through that, which was, towards the later part, his last 20, 30 years of his life is where he began to focus on those things. And again, if we're talking about, the Dharma, we're talking about Iwa Prele and all that. In the Congo, Kala Bamuntu, to be a helpful human being. Kala Ba Nkisi, to be a source of healing for the community. Kala Ba Nkasa, to be a leader in the community. All of these principles align. Kalabanganga to serve as a specialist in the community. Kalabai Kingu to be a principal in the code of community conduct. So these are all things that align across our culture, across world culture, you know. It aligns across world culture because at the end of the day, all of us who are good people want the same thing, you know. All of us who are good people at the end of the day want the same thing. And that was his focus, is to understanding, you know, how do we become better human beings? Because before we ran into anybody else, we didn't call ourselves Africans. you know, we didn't see ourselves as some other. You know, we saw ourselves as human beings, and that's what we were trying to be. Now, political reality, we had to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, "Okay, we African people." And we had to identify that, and we had to declare that. But we know at our root, we are human beings. We're the first. And these are the guiding principles that our ancestors came up with that went around the world and now are coming back to us. So it's just what we're learning out there, whatever system that we're in, we're just seeing a mirror reflection of what our ancestors put back out, put out to the world.
I say it. That's very powerful. So my last question for you, and this pertains to some of the things that you're doing now. I know that you've been very active in terms of carrying
Mhm.
Shah Mfundishi's legacy forward in terms of the
Mhm.
martial arts. And also that one of the parts of that is to create cohesion in the martial arts community. You and I've had some interesting
Mhm.
exchanges about that. So if you
Mhm.
could just tell us a bit about that work and what is meant to be a steward of the combat tradition that you inherited from your father, and also what is
Mhm.
it that you're working to accomplish?
Um, well, again, I see myself as a placeholder, and I don't mean that in any disrespectful way toward myself. I understand who I am and the time in history I am, and I'm proud of that. I see myself in the same position, and I learn from watching, the students of, I mean, the not your students too, and the children of Haj Malik Shabazz and Betty Shabazz and the Kings and the Barakas and all of those who have, stood on the shoulders of their parents uh, to continue their work, the meaningful work that they did. And I see myself in that same position, myself and my co-students under my father, and members of the Federation also. Um, yeah, so with that being said, since my father's transition, we have been rebranding uh, the Pan African Martial Arts Federation and rebuilding. and I am the acting CEO at this point in the Federation. And what we're just working to do is continue the work of our elders and ancestors, Nganga Talona, Hati Kalindi, and those who are still alive, Mfundishi, also Mfundishi Tayari Cassell, Jehutmis, and so many others, we're trying to continue to use this thing as a way to galvanize our people and to discipline ourselves and instill some type of uh, some manhood and womanhood within ourselves. We have seen again what martial arts does for ourselves as a people and as a community. It's a great task, but I think that there are no successful people who are not disciplined, and all of the people, and if you look at any community that's successful, uh, they have a connect to their ancient culture and history. We see that amongst the Jewish community. We see that amongst the Japanese community. We see that amongst even the Europeans, who, yeah, my, one of the things that my father realized in his training and his practice was that, you know, uh, that we needed a galvanizing force, which the martial arts is. And he took example from the Japanese uh, during and after World War II. And he spoke about how the level of damage that happened to them and their country and their society after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he would say that they they put down, well, they were forced to, they put down the sword, and the figurative sword, and they picked up the pen and they went into their boardroom, their schools, or not just the pen, but the idea of that warrior discipline, that sword, and they went into their homes and everywhere in their society, and they instilled that same level of discipline and focus and respect and moral code to build their society back up to where you see it is today. And he believed that we can do the same thing, and that, you know, along with the idea that, it's often said that the first thing that happened is when they came to Africa is they took away this and they took away that. They took away the language. They did. They took away all of those things. First thing they stopped, though, was the warrior culture. That was the first thing. They had to do that, you know, and there was a reason why, and we know for the physical reason why, but also for, again, the discipline and the focus that comes with that a human being needs and that a unit of people need to move forward. We don't have to, even though we have the right to protect ourselves and defend ourselves, we know that, you know. So that aside, what else is the martial arts good for? We have to look into those things, you know, in terms of rebuilding our manhood, our womanhood, rebuilding our culture, the level, again, what the first martial artists did on the planet, the first protectors, the first hunters who formed martial society around those practices. They didn't become hunters and warriors because they just jumped up and said, we want to become hunters and warriors. The conditions of the planet and the times they lived in, again, this was something that was internal, but the conditions caused them to have to form warrior rank and have to discipline themselves, and have to refine skill sets. And say, okay, now that we've done all these things, now we have to we have to refine our technology. We have to build institutions around these things, And this is how society grew. And this we have to go back to the drawing board with this, use this warrior ethic, this warrior code, because we have everything else we need. I really do believe that we have everything. We've been taught all of the lessons. We've read all of the books. We've said that to, we've said no disrespect to anybody who's out there teaching now, who is our generation under. Well, a lot of times we've heard these lessons already. They're being regurgitated, and in some ways, a lot of the regurgitation is good. I like hearing the new information and message, but I know I've heard most of this. We have to implement it. And the thing that we don't have at the level I think we need to have, if we don't have the level of implementation, which takes discipline and focus and character and fortitude to do so. Again, I don't know if I'm answering your question properly, but um,
No, definitely.
yeah, that's my work again, to be a bridge to those lessons, whether they came from my father, whether they came from being in the room with John Henry Clark or Dr. Ben or Baba Samaj, Egun Ibaye Tonu, who just transitioned a month or so ago. I was at his homegoing. And we can go Hati Kalindi and Asada Shakur, and we can go on and on. We have to do our part. So that's where I stand as being a steward in this tradition. It's just doing my work till it's time for me, as one of my big brothers, brother Bulatoni Lulama says. Do my part of the work till it's time for me to go sit down in the barber chair and sip from my barber cup.
I
You
say
know,
when I
yeah.
pour like when I oh go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, no, go, brother.
I was gonna say when I pour libation, I always end
Hmm.
with, we pour for those ancestors not yet born. But one of the things that I say is that just as we call on those ancestors, we call the names of those ancestors who lived lives which made them worthy of remembrance, that also teaches us to say, but yeah, that is the lesson that our charge is to live lives which makes us worthy of remembrance. And that's the work.
Hmm.
That's what we do here and now.
It's a continuum. It's a cord. It's a cord that runs through us. It's a continuum. It's a continuing cycle. Again, when we talk about that Tunde, that Tendoi and Congo, it's we just continuing the tradition of those who come before us. It's best to do it mindfully, though. Yeah.
Well, many thanks, Baba. This has been excellent. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us and with our listeners. Did you have anything you want to share? Any closing remarks you want to share with everyone?
No, I would just say, yeah, again, we are, in terms of continuing the tradition, myself and the new leadership of the Federation, myself, and Mrithi Mfundishi, Siraj Talona, uh, Akir Ramasui, Mfundishi, Harun Naket, Mfundishi, Babatu, Vita Cassell, Malenga Bathsheba, a sister. Let me say that we have a sister under our ranks as well too. In leadership, we are again rebuilding and rebranding the federation. We want everybody to keep their eye out in 2026. It's not going to be an overnight thing. But we're working on something for continuum of our future to a platform for us all to come together on under not under but together, at those times when people want to come together from different schools, style systems, organizations. As you see, I reach out to everyone. I try to promote what everyone's doing because the underlying message that I've got, not the underlying, the main message that I've got from my father and his comrades and all of our teachers is Ubuntu. We unity. Queen of Four spoke about that at the homegoing of Baba Samaj, when she saw all the shrines come together. Who there have been, as we know through all of our organizations, there have been issues and conflicts, and then the way everyone came together to celebrate this man and the beauty of it. And she spoke. It's the common theme I'm hearing that we're all hearing. Those who have our ears open, we're hearing unite. Unite. That's it. That's what we got to get together. We could just do that, and that's what my father was teaching. That's what all of the elders and ancestors teach. We got to come together. The reason why we're in the situation we're in now because we let ourselves get like this. We got to come together whatever way we can that's positive, because that's the one thing that they're afraid of. So Ubuntu.
Shea again, Sante Sana, Baba Khalil, Baba Mrithi, Mfundishi, Khalil Maasi. Really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And again, I thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. Again, I'm Dr. Kamar Rashid, board member with the Black Foundation, and also teaching a variety of Afro diaspora and combat arts. And we look forward to connecting with you on our next episode. Hotep.